The National Desk, America's News Now.
School shootings have been happening since I was born. I was born in the year 2000. It's 2023, and I'm tired of it.
Reaction pours in after the shooting in Las Vegas yesterday. What we now know about the shooter, the victims, and how this year's school shooting frequency compares to the past.
Taxpayers have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on research relevant to developing new prescription drugs. And more often than not, those drugs aren't available to families at an affordable price.
The Biden administration takes on Big Pharma. Lower your prices or else. And then emergency rooms available for children. Just how many lives are at stake because of hospitals that aren't ready for kids? This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. A 28-year-old man in custody tonight after firing multiple shots outside of the Temple Israel Synagogue in Albany in New York today. Luckily, no one was injured. Police have not confirmed that the synagogue or anyone inside was the target. Meantime, tonight, we are learning more about the mass shooter and the mass shooting that happened yesterday on the campus of the University of Las Vegas, killing 3 people, critically wounding one other. Here's what we know at this hour. The man behind the terror, identified as 67-year-old Anthony Polito, a professor who had been denied a job at the school. That's according to a report from the Associated Press. Polito fatally shot by police after he began his rampage, with as many as 20 shots fired before the threat was neutralized. The victims, police now say, were also professors and included at least 2 business school instructors, 64-year-old Jerry Chang and 39-year-old Patricia Navarro-Valles. The identities of the 2 additional victims have not yet been released. But a stunning tragedy for the Las Vegas community, now coming together to try and heal. You're looking at what marquees at the biggest Vegas area hotels say, reading UNLV strong. The incident marks the 80th school shooting in 2023 across the country, according to a CNN analysis, and as you can see here, is much higher than in any previous year. President Biden, coincidentally, set to travel to Las Vegas tomorrow during a campaign stop. It's unclear whether he'll visit the university campus during that time. And right now, an additional 60 U.S. citizens are in Egypt, finally cleared by the State Department and international authorities to leave Gaza. More than 400 Americans have left the besieged enclave thus far, looking to flee Gaza's bombardment as the Palestinian territory slips deeper into crisis. Tonight, as Israeli troops continue their campaign in both the north and south, striking what it says are Hamas targets, the UN warns that Gaza's humanitarian system is at risk of collapse. Aid groups say there could be a second wave of mortality stemming from infectious diseases. In addition to food and medical supply shortages, 70 aid trucks made their way in today, but aid groups say it isn't enough.
The truth of it is that it's becoming impossible to sustain human life in Gaza. The number of supplies that would be needed to keep people alive, we can't get them in.
Tonight, the IDF releasing this photo of a group of senior Hamas officials. The faces circled there, the leaders it claims to have killed in its military operation in Gaza. Hamas yet to comment on that claim. Israel says it won't agree to a ceasefire until Hamas is fully dismantled, as the conflict appears poised to widen. Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu visiting North Israel today, issuing a stark warning to Lebanon's Hezbollah that forces will unleash their fury amid an escalation in cross-border fire. Today, one Israeli civilian killed by Hezbollah aerial fire. This as several students were wounded in Lebanon due to an Israeli airstrike. Social media company Meta hit with a new lawsuit for allegedly knowingly exposing children to sexual exploitation and harm to their mental health. The Attorney General of New Mexico brought the suit after a months-long undercover investigation. National correspondent Atral Nashar has the details of the case and what it means for parents.
New calls for a culture shift at Meta. In this graphic complaint, which we've blurred, New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres accuses the company of horrific practices on Facebook and Instagram that he says serve as prime locations for child predators.
They're designed in a way to actually funnel likely victims of sexual exploitation to potential predators.
To build their case, his office went undercover, using decoy accounts posing as kids 14 or younger. Online safety expert Titania Jordan has done similar operations at her company, Bark, which offers parental control products.
I have seen video calls coming in, because you can video call on Instagram, grown men, again, looking to speak with this 11-year-old persona. It's stomach turning.
In its response to the lawsuit, Meta says, we use sophisticated technology, hire child safety experts, report content to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and share information and tools with other companies and law enforcement, including state attorneys general, to help root out predators. Torres is asking a judge to order specific changes to how the platforms organize and feed users' content. Meta whistleblowers have made national news for sounding the alarm about what they also say are dangerous practices executives are aware of.
The more time you spend in-app engaging with the content in the app, the more successful they are, the more money they make.
Tech industry leader Adam Kovacevic argues it's a mistake to assume platforms are only after short-term engagement.
If people have an overall negative experience with their service, they're not coming back, right? And that's not what any service wants. They want people to have a positive experience on their platforms so that they return.
Now, Meta is also facing lawsuits from dozens of other state attorneys general who say that their platforms are meant to be addictive to minors. Now, Meta says it's that teen safety online is important to them, and they've said that, they're disappointed the AGs would choose to sue them rather than work with them to find solutions.
And Atra, as I understand, New Mexico's Attorney General also wants a product label for these platforms. Yep. What does he mean by that?
From what we've heard him say, it sounds like something similar to what you'd see on a carton of cigarettes, a warning label that informs the user of the associated harms that come with that product. In this case, perhaps sexual violence, exploitation of children, and these social media platforms. Now, would that be legally enforceable? We're not sure. How effective would it be? Also unsure. Remember, there's that Section 230 decades-long liability protection that these social media platforms have that basically shield them from any liability or fault for what's posted on their platform. The question is, how much of a role do they play in pushing inappropriate or harmful content on minors?
Certainly will be a hot topic of conversation as we get into an election year here. Atral Nashar reporting from D.C. for us. Thank you.
Thanks.
In his ongoing civil fraud trial, former President Trump was back in a New York courtroom today. An accounting professor testified in Trump's favor, asserting that he found no evidence of any accounting fraud. Trump praised the testimony and reiterated his view that the case is biased.
This case should be over. This case should have never been brought. This was a political witch hunt by an attorney general who's out of control.
Trump will take the stand one more time on Monday as the defense's final witness. A Texas woman may be able to get an abortion as part of an unprecedented challenge to the state's ban. 31-year-old Kate Cox is 20 weeks pregnant, and doctors say her baby has a fatal condition. Today, a judge said Cox could get the procedure under an exception to the law. State officials claimed Cox does not meet the requirements for an exception. The state will likely appeal the ruling. Wyoming leaders, meantime, voting today not to auction off a piece of state-owned land in Grand Teton National Park to developers, at least for now. They've been threatening to auction off lands to get the government to pay millions to conserve them. The state lands director had recommended a starting bid of at least $80 million. The officials will revisit the proposal next fall. Lori Vallow, she pleaded not guilty today on charges of killing her fourth husband and the attempted murder of her ex-husband's niece. Vallow has already been convicted of murdering two of her children, for which she is serving a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. She has repeatedly denied any role in her children's deaths and is appealing that ruling. 3 Tucson, Arizona fast food workers are now in jail for running a large-scale theft ring from the fried chicken restaurant where they worked. They were arrested after a year-long investigation. Officials discovered the employees were reselling stolen items they had purchased from shoplifters. Police found thousands of dollars in stolen goods. Court dates have not yet been set. And coming up, the government is taking steps to make medications more affordable, but a new plan from the Biden administration could face some legal challenges. Then Republican lawmakers are continuing their efforts on an impeachment inquiry into the president, what they just unveiled, and what happens next. Plus, a Maryland cop was acquitted after being accused of killing a handcuffed man. How county leaders reacted to the verdict when we come back in just 90 seconds. A new Biden administration policy will allow the federal government to seize patents of medicines developed with taxpayer funding to lower their prices. Today, the Commerce Department laid out a strategy for agencies to use what are called march-in rights for expensive treatments. The new framework could face legal challenges from drug companies. Meantime, auto workers at the only U.S. Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is looking to join the UAW. More than 1,000 workers, roughly 30% of the plant, has signed union authorization cards. Workers in this plant failed to unionize back in 2014 and 2019, but the UAW says this time will be different as they push to expand their union. VW gave their workers an 11% raise, while UAW workers received 25% from the Big Three following the walkout this fall. Meanwhile, there are new worries that the push to, quote, electrify America is not in line with what America is actually ready for. The push has been central to the Biden administration, which just issued a new rule agreeing to a 50 oil and gas to dramatically cut their methane emissions by the end of the decade.
Sales of electric vehicles this year already in record-breaking territory, with more than 1 million sold.
And then as you drive over it, you lose.
In Detroit, a quarter-mile stretch just became the first public electrified roadway in North America.
We're going to use this as a springboard to learn and understand how things work, but ultimately, how can we scale this up?
The push has been central to the Biden administration, with the Inflation Reduction Act including $7.5 billion to build new EV charging stations.
We're going to put IBEW members and other union members to work installing a national network of charging stations along our roads and highways in our communities, over 500,000.
But 2 years later, those tasked with building those charging stations say it's slow going.
In the last 2 years, how many charging stations have actually been built?
0.
Charging manufacturer Arkady Sosanoff blames the federal government for the delays on projects that already take 1 to 3 years and require an immense amount of power.
Just to give you a sense, one vehicle charging in the parking lot will use as much power as an entire Walmart.
The Biden administration's goal of making 2/3 of new passenger cars all electric by 2032 also unlikely, experts say.
The regulation is way ahead of the public. The American public is not ready for the broad adoption of electric vehicles.
Indeed, the big three automakers have complained of major losses in revenue. Ford alone reporting losing $3 billion on sales of electric vehicles. And nearly 4,000 car dealers just sent a letter to President Biden writing, the large influx of battery electric vehicles are, quote, stacking up on our lots. But hybrid cars, which combine a gasoline engine with battery power, have been flying off the lots, with a reported jump in sales by 48% in the first 3 quarters of the year. I'm Christine Frizzell reporting for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Almost all U.S. adults are prepared to spend money this holiday season. In a recent survey from the consulting firm Deloitte, 95% of respondents said they plan to make purchases. That's higher than the previous 2 years, and that figure comes despite 72% of respondents saying they expect prices to be higher this year due to inflation. House Republicans have unveiled the text to the formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. The resolution seeks to formalize the ongoing inquiry started back in September. The Rules Committee is expected to review the legislation on Tuesday, with the full House voting for it as early as Wednesday of next week. Next Thursday is the last expected day of the year before holiday recess. Speaker Mike Johnson believes he has the votes for it to pass. New York Congressman Jamal Bowman was officially censured by the House of Representatives for pulling a fire alarm in September. Bowman had pleaded guilty to a criminal misdemeanor of the same charge. It was a bipartisan vote. 3 Democrats joined 211 Republicans. This is the 27th censure in the history of the House and the second censure this year. Michigan Democrat Rashida Tlaib was called out last month for her comments supporting a controversial Palestinian slogan. Pope Francis says he is feeling much better after a 2-week bout of bronchitis, but the 86-year-old says he still gets tired if he speaks too much since he had part of one lung removed as a young man. Francis got sick at the end of November and had to cancel his trip to Dubai for the United Nations Climate Conference. It's the second time this year he's had a serious case of bronchitis. Spotlight on America continues its in-depth look at pediatric care in America. Tonight, increased risk for kids when hospital emergency rooms are not pediatric ready. National investigative correspondent Angie Moreski is digging into research that shows where you go to get care for a critically ill child could mean the difference between life and death.
When your child has an emergency, getting care fast is essential. But many parents don't realize the ER they go to might not be prepared to care for kids.
The majority of hospitals see fewer than 10 children per day in the emergency department, and that makes it extremely difficult to be able to maintain your pediatric skills.
Does that put children at higher risk if you're not experienced in treating children?
Absolutely.
Dr. Kate Remick is co-director of the National Pediatric Readiness Project, which evaluates emergency departments nationwide. In the latest survey, the median score was just 69 out of 100 for nearly 4,000 hospitals that responded, with a score above 83 considered high readiness.
There needs to be a deliberate focus on pediatric care. Otherwise, there's a potential to misstep.
Once they're done, then I'll come back up, okay?
Yolanda Lewis knows all too well what can go wrong when an emergency room is unprepared to care for a child.
Basically, they asked me what sickle cell was. They wasn't informed or they wasn't educated on it.
3 of her 5 kids have sickle cell disease, a blood disorder that can cause seizures and strokes and requires regular blood transfusions. The family now travels an hour and a half every month from their home in Gary, Indiana, to Beacon Children's Hospital in South Bend to get the specialized care they need. But that's not always possible in an emergency. When When Marvin, now 15, was little, they had a terrible scare.
I took him to the hospital close by. Nothing was wrong, they said.
Something was wrong, but the hospital discharged Marvin until Yolanda called their pediatric specialist for help.
They called back up to the hospital, and they told me to take him back now. Every time I take my kids to the emergency room, I risk the fear of them not knowing what to do.
This 2019 study of hospitals nationwide, published by the American Academy of Pediatrics, found a critically ill child was 4 times more likely to die when admitted to an emergency department that is not pediatric ready.
If an ER is not pediatric ready, more children die.
It's absolutely true, yeah.
Dr. Kate Dukevich is the medical director at Beacon Children's Hospital, where Yolanda's kids are now treated. One of the few hospitals in northern Indiana providing pediatric specialty care.
There are not very many beds for kids, and we have seen that get a lot worse in the last several years.
According to the Pediatric Readiness Project, only about half of children nationwide have access to an emergency department that is pediatric ready.
Our emergency care systems were not designed with children in mind.
Remick says more training and planning are needed because caring for kids is not the same as caring for adults.
All right, you ready?
With fewer pediatric units open, the hope is necessity will drive progress at community hospitals for the sake of families like the Lewises.
What is your greatest worry?
My greatest worry is that they won't get the care they need.
The Pediatric Readiness Project estimates that if all emergency departments in the U.S. were pediatric ready, we could save as many as 1,400 children's lives a year. For Spotlight on America, I'm Angie Moreski.
Angie, thank you. And coming up, after decades of talks and failures, an effort to expand passenger rail in Ohio could finally become a reality. What new funding could do for travelers. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
Prince George's State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy taking questions outside of Prince George's County courtroom after the officer seen in this video, Michael Owen, was found not guilty of shooting and killing William Green in 2020. Green, sitting in Owen's police cruiser and in handcuffs, shot 6 times. The defense saying Owen was trying to protect himself after a struggle.
There were only 2 people in the vehicle that night that could tell us what happened. And unfortunately, one of them is no longer with us.
Prosecutors at one point tried for a plea agreement in the case.
We knew that that was going to be an issue. We knew that it was an issue that there was substance in his system. We knew that there was an issue that he did get into several car accidents prior to the arrest being made.
Questions also raised over missing video and a lack of DNA evidence.
Health officials are looking into an incident at a California elementary school where 25 students got sick after eating lunch yesterday. The school was locked down and emergency responders were called in. Officials say the children said they felt nauseous, dizzy, and numb in their mouths and fingers. Most of them were taken to hospitals. We don't yet know what caused them to feel sick.
This is the Amtrak Cardinal. It only comes through Cincinnati in the middle of the night. 3 days a week it heads to Chicago, 3 days it heads east to New York. The newly announced grant money would look to make it a daily train. Meanwhile, the other route being considered out of Union Terminal is known as the 3C and D. It would link Dayton, Columbus, and Cleveland to Cincinnati.
It will mean new opportunities for economic growth. It will mean new routes to help Ohio businesses to grow and expand, attract new businesses to our state. It will mean easier travel for Ohioans. It means communities in Ohio will be more connected to each other.
Senator Brown says the next step is to partner with local governments, the private sector, and more to make the potential routes a reality. He says the state must show these routes can be successful.
Well, coming up here, all about the new immersive experience based on your favorite TV shows. Stay with us. Well, if you're a Netflix fan, listen up. You're in luck. The company's working on an immersive experience based on people's favorite shows. Locations called Netflix House will be opening relatively soon with rotating installations where fans will be able to shop, eat, and play games. Netflix plans to launch their first 2 locations in the country in 2025 and then open more around the world. Very exciting. And this evening is the beginning of Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights. Hanukkah, which is Hebrew for dedication, honors the rededication of the Second Temple of Jerusalem in 164 BC. It is said that there was only 1 day's worth of oil in the temple, but it miraculously lasted 8 days. Happy Hanukkah to all who are celebrating. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. We invite you to join us again this evening for more coverage of America's top stories. Thank you so much for joining us.